Old World, Florida.
Old World, Florida.
Old World, Florida. Dude, I'm telling you, dude. Dr. Narco Longo came on and dropped the hammer of the god.
America's mother, daughter of Atlantis. God sent the weatherland. The devil sent the Spanish. Florida is Eden, the fountain of youth, Kali is deception. So Florida is the truth.
Welcome to Florida, baby.
Dr. Narco Longo.
Florida is everything. There's too much truth bombs being dropped. I can't digest it all.
Old World, Florida.
Please welcome Dr. Narco Longo.
All right, finally, am I right? It's finished. We're gonna be getting into some let me see, how can I find a way to fit in a couple more times? But so we're gonna be talking about the Phoenicians today, or more so the Etruscans, but drawing a connection to the Phoenicians and bringing them into the Gulf Coast of America, right?
Yep.
And we're joined by or I guess we're both streaming, so I'm joined by him, he's joined by me. But joined by Ben, a favorite of the channel, man. Glad to have you back.
Good to be back as always. You know, we're always talking behind the scenes, but nothing that anybody else gets to see. And you know, you're gracious and we make a lot of plans to talk, and then I always end up bailing on you. You know, life happens, and when there's a million other people that rely on me, I gotta drop things often, and it makes doing interviews hard. But you're always willing to work with me, so I'm grateful and happy to be back.
No worries, man. No worries. It's you got a fan. I'm over here by myself, so I understand. But where we're gonna get into it, where we're gonna start off. I know Ben's probably got some good articles for us. I've got a little bit of linguistics, and I guess we could just kind of start off with what would you say the topic is? Etruscans or Phoenicians?
Oh man, I think I like your title, Ancient Seafarers, and we've mentioned this so many times, and you know, people don't always know what goes on behind the scenes with me and you, but the very first article I ever shared with Longo, we're going to look at today. We're not going to cover the whole thing because I've had a video I've been working on for over a month in relation to it, but it's going to cross a bunch of paths that me and you have talked about. The Fertile Crescent, who were the quote Phoenicians. We're going to look at it from a standpoint of the Phoenicians, not necessarily as people from Carthage or a specific phenotype or race of people, but more of a society. And that the mariner, as we've discussed before, was a privilege. To be a captain, you were essentially like a 33-degree Freemason. You worked your whole life and progressed through different stages, and you were granted what was called the level of Q, or the rank of Q. It was like captain. you were given a compass. This is where the compass in the square comes from. The compass was a mariner's tool, although it wasn't used in architecture. And the square represented the mason on land. So you had the two adjoining pathways. You had the
Mhm.
person who traveled by sea. We've mentioned this before. They were basically two groups of people. The mariners were a different class of people, and the builders on land were a different class of people. And that's where the two symbols come together. The compass and the letter Q. This is an important marker. We're going to show correlations in languages between the Phoenicians, Hebrew. Me and you have talked about cough, the definition of cough. I did a talk long ago on Radio Tartary where we discussed the movie The Matrix, and I showed how the letter Q or cough from the Hebraic and the Phoenician were very much identical, and that when Neo or neodymium is plugging into the matrix, he's plugging into the cerebellum, the back of the head, which is the definition of Q or cough. And these societies knew and held sacred the
Is that
concept of,
the neocortex?
yeah, right,
Yeah.
and the magnetism, right, the dualistic nature of subconscious mind and conscious mind, and the polarities, right? These things were the sacred sciences of these cultures, and you know, I think that's lost today when we talk about Freemasonry and these societies. You know, they obviously have evil undertones, but there's more to it. And Old World Micmac said lodestone compass, absolutely. The lodestone. I mean, you know, you gave me the name Ben. I've talked a lot about the lodestone. This goes back to consciousness and the springing of consciousness, the analog mind, the analog eye. We've talked again about the symbolic nature of the Gulf of Mexico. You just highlighted the cube, Kaaba, exactly. So yeah, Q was not only did it reference magnetism, the lodestone, the Godhead, the monad, but it also represented the quintessence or the ether. And this was the magical fifth element in alchemy. And this connects again with pitchblende and magnetite and you know, the radium work. If people aren't familiar with my radium work, Ra, Ra was also the Lemurian god, and the first king of Atlantis was a lodestone. He was the central dot of the monad of the ring city of Atlantis. He was a stone, a black stone. And yeah, so that's a lot of rambling, but kind of a short introduction to kind of what I wanted to talk about, bringing the metaphysical part of it, but also showing the kind of travels between um, the North Pole or the Northland and the Gulf of Mexico and the Mediterranean, and how the Etruscans and the Phoenicians play into this.
Right. You want to touch on this little comment here with the Q,
Yeah,
sperm, and the egg, and
so funny. I just love coincidences. About, oh man, 16 years ago, I saw Queens of the Stone Age,
oh
and
yeah,
it was actually a phenomenal live show. Their music is pretty impressive live. But yeah, so the symbology here. We talked about the concept of the Florida Peninsula. Now, what people have to understand is that most of the southern part of America was known as Florida, and Florida, as we know it today, was actually just the peninsula of
mhm,
Florida. It wasn't Florida itself. Florida extended all the way up to Long Island or even farther, and went as far west as New Mexico and perhaps farther. And these maps line up a lot with the New Granada and the transformation from California being an island in that kind of time frame. I just did a video about California Island was part of Lemuria, and really interesting article. And if anyone isn't familiar with my Anomalous America series, I cover California quite in depth and show that almost all the major cities of California lie on top of a buried city. San Francisco, San Diego, Los Angeles. There are buried stories, several stories down. And but yeah, so anyways, great map. And
Yeah.
Cuba, and why Cuba and Hades are placed specifically is very important. This also ties in with the Chicxulub crater, or perhaps the meteor event that kicked off I kind of call it an impregnation of the Gulf of Mexico,
Mm.
was related to this event. And we've also mentioned in previous talks about a specific man who translated the obelisk in Central Park. And his translation was that the Egyptians landed in the Gulf of Mexico on a meteor that came from the moon. And when you study Atlantis and the Egyptian myths and where they say they came from, they say they came from the Red Land to the west. And me and you have bounced around so many different ideas. But yeah, the Gulf of Mexico is incredibly important. And then radium obviously ties into this very much, as the Gulf of Mexico is a absolute hotbed for radium. This correlates with your elixir of life, your radium springs in Florida, and how that Ponce de Leon wasn't looking for the fountain of youth; he found it. They all knew it was there. This wasn't some mystery. They were looking for spring water because it existed in large quantities in Europe and was well documented. Yeah, you've done plenty of material on this. We've talked about this a lot, but it goes unnoticed, and it's a very, very important subject. This ties in with your 300-year-old Indians. I'm spacing. What was their name again?
The Timucua.
Timucua. It also causes gigantism, and not gigantism as we know it today, where you actually have a physical bone disorder. It causes everything to grow larger, from fruits and vegetables. It actually swells
Yeah.
water cells, water structures with radium. It also absorbs more minerals. It also carries more minerals into the body. Everything. It causes a woman's breast milk to be same
now
thing.
we're talking.
Yeah.
Here,
What do we got?
Here, let's do.
Oh, great point. I just read that about the admirals. Oh yeah, giant. What is that? Lettuce?
Giant cabbage in the
Cabbage.
Everglades, Southwest Florida, right where the radium is.
Love it. Yeah, and me and Longo have made endless connections with oranges. Why the orange tree was sacred, the citrus family in general. Citrus naturally absorbs more radium. I tend to lean towards the citrus family being a creation of humans. Not genetically modified as we know it today,
right.
but a creation. And I think it was to absorb more minerals.
Can I read this right here? Because it
Please
doesn't.
do. Absolutely.
It doesn't only point to the radium. It points to something else that you really like to talk about. So this is images of Key Marco, or Marco Island. This is where Frank Cushing was pulling all those interesting things out of the ground. When the colliers settled at Marco, they exploited fertile soil and ancient Colusa shell middens to produce successful vegetable crops. The photograph above shows vegetable crops at Marco on February 7th, 1905. Blah, 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 blah. So, yeah. What does that mean? How does someone use an ancient burial mound to their advantage, growing crops, growing large crops? But, the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah.
Here we go. This thing of cabbage. Fern Riggs remembers purchasing a head of cabbage from Collier, weighing more than 14 pounds. 14-pound cabbage.
Yeah.
Right there. So.
Yeah, it's for anyone that's familiar with your work or our time together. This is a subject we've covered quite in depth. But when you look at crystals absorb light, and radium impregnates its energy into crystals. And they can actually store, like a battery, radium's energy in a crystal. and they find that diamonds and quartz turn red or a bright orange, and they can use this energy almost like a laser. And it just keeps taking me back to Atlantis, and this advanced kind of technology was well understood. Crystals being a very um, common use. Again, we're dealing with secondhand information, but for those who aren't familiar with Edgar Casey, I'd say he has some of the most out there information, but also for me, some of the most interesting when it comes to technology. And, he covers a lot of the giants and the titans. And, radium produces natural gas as well as oil and several other byproducts, but it melts granite and melts anything around it essentially. It creates large cavities in the earth. And I've postulated that radium is the driving force behind the rising and sinking of continents, continental drift, volcanism, earthquakes, and sinkholes. Obviously, I think not only is it
Ooh, yeah.
underwater, right? The washing of the water underneath obviously plays a big role, but for the most part, for me, it's sinkholes. And one of the articles or videos I just did on Lemuria talks about the Great Gas Belt that goes through the center of the Pacific. And the author, this is in the late 1800s, is postulating that the dissolving of one of these gas belts or a huge gas well caved in or exploded. And he says that could have been one of the ways that Atlantis and Lemuria met their end and part of the island sank. And that makes the most sense to me, especially when I mentioned Edgar Casey, because he says essentially the same thing. He says that the Atlanteans were killing giant sea monsters. They were baiting them to these gas wells underwater and then exploding them. They were basically tricking these huge sea creatures that they were at war with and blowing one up. And they blew up a gas well that was connected to several, and it started a chain reaction. But anyways, before I ramble too much, radium is really, really important. And I think me and you are done some of the best work there is on YouTube discussing this. And, my series on radium, for those who haven't seen it, is definitely worth checking out. And as we get farther into the timeline and closer to World War I, it's really going to start blowing your mind. CERN, the Hadron Collider, these things were all theorized based on research specifically about radium. But yeah, the symbology we've talked a lot about in mythology, and that some of these gods and these kind of pantheons were created around elements.
Can I read something? Is Old World Micmac still in here? Old World Micmac? Let's see. He just posted this 14 minutes ago. I can't see where it starts, but it's a good connection to Eastern America. These artifacts had been identified as Phoenician decades prior to Dr. Fell's research, but these facts were incompatible with the dogmas and assumptions of modern historians, so they were ignored. The Egyptian presence in the New World has been found in the writing system of the Wabanaki, Micmac Indians, an Algonquin tribe of Maine, in an ancient tablet found on Long Island in New York, and on the Iowa stela mentioned earlier in this chapter. So, yeah, man.
Yeah, shout out to Old World Micmac. If you don't follow him on Instagram, you need to be. Yeah, love all this posts. Stuff I've been talking about for a long time too, and he makes a lot of really powerful correlations, similar to what we're doing, but from a Micmac perspective. But when you study the Micmac language, it leads you back to the Phoenicians and the Egyptians, and and they were trading with the Basque. The Basque people were one of the Micmac allies, and they held, they were crossing the Atlantic, long before we're told, and they were visiting Europe before Columbus ever made his way to America. So it just goes to show, and that Columbus and that whole narrative, they knew exactly what they were looking for. And what did he say when he landed in Cuba? I'm in Asia,
Mhm.
so, and what does that
Mhm.
mean? It's pretty interesting when we start breaking down languages, and we're going to correlate. For those that don't know, the Chinese language was completely rewritten, and it was you remember the article, and we've talked about this before, but for the viewers who don't know, um, the British, when they took over China and they started controlling the opium and drug running, and they just corrupted the shit out of China, the opium wars. Along with the opium wars, just like the Bolsheviks and all these other wars, language manipulation is the actual true. Well, it's many things. It's financial, it's enslavement, it's slave labor, but language plays a big part because with these drug wars, languages always get rewritten. And Chinese was completely rewritten. They tore it all apart. They just made it an amalgamation. It was like a garbage. They just threw all these different languages together, and the origins were completely lost. Now, when you study the Chinese language in its roots pre 1800 or pre 1840, 1850, pre opium wars, you'll find a million similarities between the Etruscan language, the Italians, the Phoenicians, Finnish. In fact, the roots of Chinese are Finnish,
You don't say.
Runic. And you can jump in at any time. I'm just going to ramble. So
No,
please.
it's exactly what we wanted to get into.
Yeah.
I guess
And
we could just no continue.
Tona V in the channel said India superior. Yeah. And, and like I said, India is superior, right? The Brahmin existed in the Yucatan just like the Phoenicians did, and this is like a good route jumping off point perhaps into maybe some of your stuff. Maybe we start up north and we start with the Finnish, and then I can work in kind of my Etruscan um, articles, or we can jump into
Yes.
my Phoenician article. I'm only going to share a little bit of it because I have a whole video on it, but we can show what the people in the 1850s, 1860s, and this is a Masonic lodge. This is their own paper. So it wasn't really meant for public consumption and what they said the Phoenicians were. So we could maybe read a little bit of that, and then we can jump into some of what you wanted to share. Does that sound good?
For sure, man. For sure.
Okay. I'm going to share my
And
screen.
oh, you want to go first?
No, you can.
Sorry.
You're already presenting.
Sorry, I'm getting text messages stinging in my head. Yeah, sure. I'll just explain the title real quick. Finnish equals Phoenician. Right now, the Finnish are Phoenician. The Phoenician were Finnish originally when they left the North Pole, that is. Now, many centuries afterward, they became many other things. But it's my opinion that we have a Finnish or Arctic origin. Why? Because these are the people who disseminated astrology, phonetic language, and Arctic agriculture, Arctic domesticated animal, right? From the North Pole outward to the other continents after a cataclysm. So all information, knowledge, seeds, where do we put our seed vaults today? Seed vaults today are stored as close to the North Pole as we can. The major seed vaults and storage containers, and if shit hits the fan, where do we keep Earth's most valuable things? Up towards the North Pole. Why is that? Because it's the most central location on the planet. So the Finnish people, being closest to this polar region, after the beginning of the Ice Age, they were isolated, isolated, okay, in that northern region, polar Arctic region. Now, astrology. How do we know that astrology comes out of the North Pole? Because the prefix as, that is indicative of Viking mythology. The Viking gods, the High Norse gods, the High Finnish gods, the Asir, the Asir. This is where you get your Assyrians, right? So Phoenician coming from Finnish, Assyrian coming from Asir, right? Bearded rulers showing up out of nowhere. And then you have your Well, like I always like to start off with, um, damn, the names. Finnish. So the word Finn goes back to many different phonetic roots, but the word phonetic is the phonetic root where Finn comes from. So this is the grand finale, the finish line. Okay, this is the thread which all phonetic languages go back to. Hence, a central location at the North Pole, right? So, this Finnish, Finn means fine. If you call a girl fine, that means she's beautiful. Well, in Swedish and in Finnish today, that has the same meaning. Fiend means fine. If you're fiending for something, you're desiring for something, right? So this is the phonetic thread where we get fine. If you finished, yeah, not to be crude. I saw someone comment that, but this is a word that has to do with lovemaking and pun making. So Punic, right? You have linguistics and you have the lingam, right? Same phonetic thread right there, and
Yeah.
there's a reason for that. And Finnish, Phoenician, these are your Arctic seafarers with red hair, light features coming out of the North Pole. For what? To spread their astrology, to spread their sciences across the earth, right? So that's what and we're going to be seeing some evidence of that, of Norse seafarers leaving the North Pole and arriving in destinations, tropical destinations, showing up with knowledge, information. Not a lot of people, not conquerors. This is the thing about the Phoenicians. For an empire, they didn't do much conquering, right? And their homeland is, we're told, is just this tiny little strip. Their territory so vast. And Finnish, right? I'll flip through this just a little bit more. This is a Finnish symbol, the looped square. Now, you could say that this is the four corners of the earth, right? The four quadrants. But this Nordic Finnic symbol leaves the North Pole and then shows up in the southeastern United States, shows up in China, shows up in many different places. Now, this is the symbol that Apple, right? Apple of Eden, right? Would use as their command key. The command key. Why this symbol? Why is this symbol giving the commands? And this is, I believe, flag of the kingdom of Etruria. And you see your northern fleur-de-lis, which are an Arctic symbol, pointing to the north. And by the way, guys, those are Finnish colors. The blue and the white are your modern day Finnish colors, just like your command key with the blue and the white. Here's the Finnish flag. Here's another Finnish flag. And just to prove this point a little more, how did the Etruscans depict themselves? As Nordic-looking Arctic men and women. Right? Now you see this guy right here?
Now, what's really important, sorry to cut you off, is that on the really early Etruscan vases, they are Nordic looking, but they're wearing Asiatic clothing. Something we'll cover later in this show, but an important note is that the dress is incredible, and you can see the worldwide trading going on, right? We've talked about the purple dye, we've talked about the symbols, the language, right, and clothing and hairstyles and the beards, of course, but the symbol here too is interchangeable with the swastika and was used almost interchangeably.
Now, this is a swastika, actually. This is coming out of the southeastern United States, Tennessee, otherwise known as Tunisia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Back on ancient maps, or early colonial maps, parts of this region were being called tunica. Hello. So this, by the way, the swastika is an inherently Arctic symbol because
Yep.
it is showing the procession of the sky through the seasons from a Arctic polar central viewing point. This is why the North Pole is so significant for astrology. You are getting the least obstructed view of the skies, meaning you don't have to wait for one portion of the sky to come towards you. You are underneath the axis upon which the sky turns. So being down by the tropics, this is not where the vast majority of astrological wisdom was ever generated. Now, it may have thrived in certain areas, but just like we house our seeds today up close near the North Pole, because there is no South Pole, and because that's the most central location, this is where knowledge and things like that are stored underground in case of cataclysm. Now go look at the Lemminkainen Temple of the Bach Saga to see what I'm talking about. Some of the caves in Finland that house some of these things. But here's the looped square that I'm talking about. This is in the southeast United States. Okay, we have a four-corner zodiac symbol in the center, in the middle of the sun. And these are your Lord God birds with the red heads, your pileated woodpeckers.
And the sun being depicted as a cross is really important too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like I said, that's the Finnish symbol.
And really quick, Tonaviv pointed out that the busts are not authentic, the ones you showed. I think he's relating to the fact of what we were already mentioning when we first started this, that there were all phenotypes. There were primarily Nordics, especially when we're talking from a Finnish seagoing people. But Phoenicians were depicted as woolly-haired, dark-skinned, round head, Asiatic eyes, Caucasian, whatever. That's where we're going to go with this, is that we're not discussing just a specific phenotype or skin color or anything. It was a conglomeration, right? Because we were obviously talking about that after the Ice Age, these people traveled the world as mariners, and it wasn't just a specific group of people. This society, they label themselves Phoenicians, the builders of Solomon's Temple and all these other things, belonged not to a specific race of people, but to this secret group that we'll talk about more. So I just wanted to address that. Obviously, when we speak from the Nordic Finnish root, red hair, light-skinned, number one feature. But as we get more into the Yucatan and the Mediterranean, Etruscans were shown as we just mentioned, all phenotypes. Same with Phoenicians, and in the Gulf and in Atlantis, same thing. You had tall and dark skin, you had tall and light skin, red hair, you had short and black skin, and you had Asiatic, and all in between. Anyways, just wanted to say that real quick.
Sure. So I hope people aren't getting touchy about seeing white faces and blonde hair and beautiful ancient specimens. Okay. Now, to say that a bust is fake or not from the comfort of your own, computer, I think is a little bit laughable. Now, to double down on this, we can go into how these people depicted themselves with painting. So I don't know the detail on all of those busts, but I do know that how these people depicted themselves tells pretty much exactly what I'm saying. Now, the Finnish, in my opinion, originated Phoenicians from Finland. Okay.
Yeah.
This is going to show where, as they depict themselves, and you can't do away with this part of the story. Okay. There's no, racial bias will obscure you to the truth. If you can't swallow seeing somebody that doesn't look like you on the screen, you're the opposite of a researcher. You're the opposite of a lover of truth if we're getting uncomfortable seeing certain phenotypes. Now, I talk about different colors all day,
Of course.
but it seems to be one that gets the most hate, believe it or not. But I'm not going to go into that. So this is how they depict themselves. And why is this important? Because you can't do away with the name Phoenician.
Nope.
Phoenician, which means red.
hmm
Red. Now, red skin comes from where? Either rosy-skinned Arctic people, or the fact that Northern European people, should they choose to travel south, would have zero sun resistance. And therefore, okay, he would put on red paint to protect themselves, red iron ochre to protect themselves from the sun exposure.
Yeah.
This is where you get your Phoenician, fiery, rosy, okay? Purple, why? Because they probably have Rh negative blood. So they have the blue blood, the purple veins shining through their skin. Okay, you don't see blue blood unless it's on a very pale-skinned individual and you can see their veins popping out of their skin. So blue bloods, Phoenicians, Czech, rustic, Etruscan, Rus, the Red Vikings. Well, let's go take it that route. The Rus from Russia, the Kievan Rus, okay, the families of the Rose, etc. Now, these are your Arctic people. Now, people, anybody who hates on Arctic, polar, or rejects people like this are rejecting your own, not your ancestors, but your relatives. Because guess what these people looked like before that ice came onto this earth?
Yeah.
Those people were melanated themselves.
We all were, of course.
You think they chose to get bleached in the ice for thousands of years? No. So why would we blah, blah, blah? Doesn't matter. Let's just flip through some more of these.
Yeah. The melanation thing is key. We were all melanated.
This is what they depict themselves as. Okay. Clear, bright, blonde hair. Now, these, I don't know if these are considered frescoes, but these wall paintings were protected from the elements. Okay.
I think these are burial paintings.
Yes. And here we have the ritual dance, Tomb of the Lionesses in Tarquini. Now, here we see, why is the person with the blonde hair darker skinned than the person with the black hair? Because the person with the blonde hair, as most blonde people are, has decreased sun resistance, meaning this guy is going to be using red paint, essentially makeup, you know?
Yep.
So that's why the person with the darker hair, who likely has darker eyes, is going to have increased sun resistance to the point where they don't need to put on the red body paint anymore. So these are your Etruscans. You know, the Bible will tell you the Phoenicians are the Canaanites. The Canaanites.
hmm
Here we go. So now this one is clearly a not so melanated individual. Okay. Woman dancing, Tomb of the Lionesses. And you will see melanated people showing up on these. But when you see light hair like that, you will always see the red skin. Almost always. And basically, the Finnish people were coming out of the North Pole and mixing with melanated people very quickly. So afterwards, after this early Arctic diffusion, this is where, by the way, this is where your Viracocha start showing up.
hmm
Okay. This is where your, I forget what the Africans call them, but blonde-haired agriculturalists, astrologers, agriculturalists showing up out of nowhere. And the story's repeated in many different tropical kingdoms of, you know, look up the Arctic home of the Vedas. Good book that I haven't read, but I'm reading right now. Arctic home of the Vedas, where, you know, the Aryans will tell you someone came from the north. They brought with them a new language, new way of looking at the stars, and a new way of feeding people. So,
Maurice Cotterell, if anyone isn't familiar with his work, he does a fantastic breakdown in his book called The Gods or Super Gods. He shows all of this, these Nordic people that came and taught agriculture and sciences and astronomy, astrology, and it was one of my favorite authors. Just popped in my head as I was looking up at my books.
thank you. Now, this I saw the here, Christopher, $200. I really appreciate that, man. We don't have the poll up in the house I'm staying at right now, or else I'd give you a dance. But I'm sorry, man. Thanks for that, dude.
Amazing.
Appreciate that.
Nice,
Is that-
Chris.
was that? I can't tell. That was for me, right?
Yeah, that was for you.
Shell, yeah. Thank you, Chris, man. Appreciate it, Topher. Happy to ladle the gravy anytime. So is Tonavi still in here? You know, Tone, come on, brother. We got people side by side right here. More melanated on the right, okay? Not so melanated on the left. Aren't people, why aren't we interested in understanding where these different people came from, right? Shouldn't be, oh, that color equals fake. That color equals fraudulent.
Yeah.
That's not a mindset I operate under. It's not a healthy one to bring about through every decision or etc. Not to single you out, buddy. But, also, let's look at the facial structure. Tall bridge of the nose, high bridge on the nose. Okay, you'll find this with Greek people. You'll find this with Irish people. And you might find this with Basque people.
Yep. That's where I get my high bridge.
Yeah. Oh, I've got a high bridge.
Yep. Same here.
For sure.
My mom says it's all Basque, Mediterranean blood.
Yes. Yeah. And let's look at some more.
Yeah.
Here we go.
And for those, again, who haven't looked into my Anomalous America series, episode 1, Alaska, we show that Alaska was covered in Etruscan tombs and Etruscan art. And they found, quote, buried Grecian cities with the finest Grecian pottery anywhere in the world. And they found frozen cities in ice where they found temples of mosques. And when we discuss Greek pottery, it always leads back to, well, who did the Greeks get it from? Well, it's the Phoenicians and the Etruscans. And the symbols you were showing earlier, although the pottery and the method changes and it de-evolves a bit because of substance and what you have available, you'll find the same symbology and symbols used in the American Southwest. And that's where the swastika slowly evolved away or was just a part of a different culture, like your symbol that you showed earlier. And the art of the Etruscans, the frescoes, the funeral art, and their tomb construction style existed here in America and in Alaska.
Right. You have your Tucson, your Tuscany.
And Venice.
Oh, yeah. The list goes on and on. Cartagena, Carthage, Venezuela, Venezuela,
Yeah. Florence, Arizona, which is the only other pineal-based county in America alongside you-know-who in Florida.
Yes.
Which relates back to the Etruscans and Italy. And remember, the Etruscans said that they repopulated Italy after a cataclysm. And what did they bring with them? They brought with them canals, ancient stones, construction, giant walls, and Janus worship they brought with them as well, which goes to the Vedics. And there's so many correlations there between the Brahmins, the Magi, the quoted sages of the Etruscan. Their cosmology was identical because it's the cosmology, as you've been stating, that came from the northern lands.
Tone, $5. Thank you, man. I'm just bringing up the fact that paintings have been repainted. Look at Mozart. Everyone thinks he's white, but it's totally fake. Paintings can be faked. Okay, well, things can be proven too. And if you're going to tell me that Mozart is not what we all think he is, it's going to take a lot to prove that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm
Please don't.
familiar with that too, and of course you have to, you have to tread lightly with any of these things, and just like people bring up with me in newspapers that they could all be frauds and reproduction, but when you look at, there are several very high quality books on the funeral art in the tombs of the Etruscans, and similar to the Egyptians, they show all skin colors, all of them, all hair colors, all hair types. Yeah. So something, that we show across the screen could be, um, shown to be, incorrect. But
Mhm.
we're not just focusing the whole presentation on one picture. We're showing countless. We'll get into more articles here too that strengthen what we're saying.
Right.
Oh,
So a
I
lot.
saw this one today. How funny is that?
Right. And there's your runes. Etruscan is runic.
Yep.
Yeah, your writing, and you've got your meandros here that often display swastikas as well.
And the
And
labyrinth symbology that was incredibly strong among the Minoans. We've already shown the Minoan relation across the sea to the Yucatan and Florida.
mhm,
But the Minoans were also known as the Lydians. And the
mhm,
Lydians were the home, or the original before the cataclysm of the Etruscans.
yes.
Oh, and their language is almost identical. It was a mystery, and we'll get into some articles with the first professor who, after 20 years of research, showed that the Phoenician Etruscan roots were very strong and that they correlated to Finnish.
Yes, they do. We were talking about that with Dylan Sicoccio that I had on earlier, like 2 weeks ago or so.
And also, before we end here today, we're going to look at a little Ignatius Donnelly and see what
Mm.
he said about the Finnish and the Etruscans, and how he
Ooh,
said the mythology of the Etruscans was identical to the Kalevala.
wow. I need to hear that. I'm lacking on that information.
Yeah,
But
Donnelly's language breakdowns with the Etruscans and the phonetics were very interesting, and it's part of kind of the correlation again that we discussed with the Q, and
mhm.
why that was such a sacred letter and symbol.
Shall I, man? Dude, I can't wait. Here we've got blonde, red, okay, and black, or darker, or whatever's behind the olive leaves, and high bridges on the noses, very, very high, right? And we keep going forward. We see more yellow, golden, strawberry blonde hair.
And the
You know,
Etruscans were supposedly the originators of makeup,
mm,
strengthening what we were talking about with the why is the original root word of makeup rouge?
right.
It's not lipstick. It's because they were covering their entire body with it.
Look at the discrepancy in skin color here.
Hmm.
Clearly you're either seeing a non-melanated person and a highly melanated person, or a non-painted person and a painted person.
And these,
Okay.
again, we've discussed this too on your shows before, but we talk about the difference between the navigators, the people that operated the oars, the oarsmen's. You had
Hmm.
oarsmen's, you had captains, you had navigators, and then you had the astrologers who were very much tied in with the navigators. And you can see on a huge boat from Etruscan art as well as Phoenician that you have all of these different classes or phenotypes, skin colors existing on the ship, and they all served a different purpose, and that their skin color denoted this. This is kind of a micro representation of your macro. You take a melanated person, you put them in the Arctic for 1,000 years, they're going to lose all their melanation.
Hmm.
And
Exactly.
the oarsmen They were oaring outside all day. They were very melanated, and they were often picked because not only were they picked the stronger men, but they were picked because they were very melanated. Otherwise, they would burn. The navigators and the astrologers spend most time below deck during the daytime, and were only on the deck at night. This correlates incredibly strong with what I mentioned on Longo's show a few months back, where we talked about the Jaguar priests and how the priest class of the Yucatan, they spend no time outside. They didn't even see the sun. They were born in a cave, they lived in a cave, and they only came outside at night. Their eyes lost all melanation. They had blue-eyed people. The priests were blue-eyed. You do this for, hundreds of years. Just like if you take a group of people and you put them underground, they lose all their melanation in 2 generations, maybe even faster than that. And you can find these correlations all over. In the Vedics, they talk about this too, that the astrologers never saw the sun, and it made their night vision far stronger. And this crosses into the mariner contingency as well as the priest class. Sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. Definitely not interrupting. I'm was kind of just, that was all just to display the link between Finland and the Etruscans, right?
Yeah. And then when you look at, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but when you look at some of the funeral or the tomb paintings in Egypt, they show these same exact anomalies. I wouldn't call them anomalies, but same thing. Red-skinned people, right? White-skinned people, dark-skinned people, even Asiatics are depicted in the tombs of Egypt,
Right. Yeah, you've got white, yellow, red, and
Yep.
dark.
Yep. Same with the Hololantian narrative. The same thing existed there.
Mm-hmm. And
would you like me to read a little bit of this Phoenician article?
Sure, man.
Since we've been
sure. Let's get into it.
So yeah, like I stated already, but for anyone new to the video to the show, I'm going to be doing a whole video on this, kind of breaking down certain parts of this article. But it's one of my favorites, and like I mentioned earlier, it's the first article I ever shared with Longo, and it's been so long I don't think he remembers it, which is great. So it'll be fresh.
Yeah.
And yeah, you put me up perfect.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah, I'm not going to read the whole thing.
Thick bitch.
Yep, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but stay tuned. And I got an Etruscan video coming out tomorrow that'll go a little more into detail into some of these things that we covered today here lightly. And if you haven't seen the rest of that, I strongly recommend. It shows the Roman roots and the reconstruction of Italy. We'll get into a little mud flood. We'll talk about some of the Etruscan cities in Italy and how they correlate to America, on and on. So, but yeah, so this is from Wisconsin, 1859. And I'm just going to highlight some things I wanted to discuss here. So this was delivered at the celebration of the OEO 1001, held in Mineral Point, December 28th, 1858. Brethren and gentlemen, my address upon the present occasion will be somewhat of a desultory character. I should be pleased to confine myself to a purely historical dissertation, but the great intervals between our public celebration and the numerous topics of interest which have forced themselves upon my attention will prevent me from devoting what little time I can occupy to any one subject, to the total exclusion of all others. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. To the brethren, it is always a source of delight to dwell on recollections of a departed brother who obtained the highest honors and distinction that can be conferred by our order, and bore them unsullied through the whole career of a long and eventful life. And certainly the uninitiated must be gratified in hearing our best praises of a man who has conferred unmeasurable blessings upon myriad of his fellow beings. Men of all creeds of religion, of all hues of political faith, however far they be separated by the difference of opinions and pursuits, can cordially unite with us in the visible and ceremonious expression of a grateful remembrance of the man who first gave this continent the modern world. Now they're talking about Columbus. And at first, that may be a little odd. But basically, what they go on to say, and I'll focus more on this later, is that basically he was part of this secret order. And what this secret order was aware of is the same thing that we've kind of been discussing here. And yeah, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. But the class of historians designated by the members of the Oriental Order as barbaric, the discovery of the wonderful properties of the magnet and its adaptation is generally conceded to Flavio Gioia about the beginning of the 14th century. It is not difficult, however, to construct this hypothesis merely by historical probabilities and without having recourse of the Chaldaic records. From the accounts in the sacred writings of the voyages performed by the ships of Solomon to the land of Ophir, whence they returned laden with gold, after an absence of 3 years, together with the circumstances that many antiquities have recently been discovered in California, which indicate the presence in that country at remote periods of civilized people familiar with the arts and learned in characters and symbols of our order. Considering the towering wisdom of Solomon, his eminent capability of forming such a conception. Now, remember, we discussed Solomon. Who did Solomon rely on? He relied on the Phoenicians on the water to transport the gold and to seek the land of the gold, and he relied on the Phoenicians to construct his temple. He basically did nothing but pick the best people he could find to construct this. The amount of gold consumed in building and decorating the temple, it is to say the least a reasonable conjecture that it was he who originally discovered and colonized California. Now, again, those familiar with my show, Anomalous America, definitely check out my California episode. I cover this a lot. I show that the Phoenicians were found on the Oregon coast as well as California, San Diego, and there are buried cities under 400 or 500 feet of lava flows all over California. And that the gold rush of this era, so remember, this is being written, this was spoken in 1858, right at the crest of this. And the things that they were finding when they were doing this insane gold mining were unbelievable, really strengthening what this man is saying. So if you want a little bit more information or a presentation on that, definitely check out Anomalous America, California. Having thus arrived at the result, the manner of its accomplishment scarcely seems a conjecture. He must have understood the use of the mariner's compass. And we are only filled with wonder that Solomon, the powerful and wise, has discovered and colonized this continent. Its inhabitants should be found in barbarous and degraded a state of affair, the lapse of only 25 centuries. This rapid change from enlightenment into barbarism cannot be accounted for by human wisdom. Reasoning from the data which we have, it is one of the incrustable providences of the great grand Signior, who holds the winds of the heaven in his fist. Another strong evidence of the discovery and colonization of this continent by Solomon is to be found in the striking physical and intellectual resemblance observed between the North American Indians and the Jews. Both have an olive skin, coarse black hair, high cheekbones, and sharp black piercing eyes. Both look with a high degree of suspicion upon all animals of their kind, and both are preeminent for their cunning and powerful strategy. Their taste, habits, and customs in many respects are more similar than they would reasonably be expected to remain in the case of a people who have been separated for 10 or 15 or 20 centuries. It has been my good fortune to have an opportunity observing the character, customs, and habits of the various tribes inhabiting Minnesota, California, Oregon, Washington Territory, and I have noticed in many instances that they not only continue to observe customs and ceremonies which were peculiar to the Jews as a nation, but also many which they practice as members of the Oriental Order in common, with which the people of other nations, this latter branch of this subject, I will take occasion to notice when I speak of a latter period. Now, there's a fantastic book out there called the Oriental Masonry. You can get this on archive.org. Chock full of amazing stuff. Crisscrosses a lot of the stuff that's in this article. And it goes as far like Donnelly says that Atlantis was America. And they were dealing with a cataclysmic event and a kind of repopulating of this region.
Absolutely, man. Can I shut?
Jump in, please, because I'm going to skip ahead
So,
to the Phoenician part. Go ahead.
Vince, thanks for the $10, man. I visited Finland during the summer of 1994. Thought their name came from how they can finish a bottle of vodka like it's only water. So yeah, I'm sure that has something to do with it too. But they like to finish things. They're great craftsmen, and they have pride in what they do. They have finesse. So the Polish is where you get your polish. All of Europe used to be an assembly line. Okay, in the greatest corporation there's ever been. Okay, that was all geared towards the creation of life. Czechoslovakia would be where everything gets its check. Okay, it's on its conveyor belt on its way out, and it gets one of the final checks. Then it goes into polish, get polished, right? It's been checked, it's ready for the polish, gets polished. Then it goes over to Finland, and it's ready, it's finished, right? It's ready. It goes through Russia, it's ready. It's rosy, it's ready. These are your redheads, redskins. And yeah, or if you're in Russia, you're rushing it along the assembly line, right? Is that making sense? So this all used to be an assembly line going to the Asgard, the center of that donut at the middle of the north. That's Finland, and Finnish, that's where Finnish comes from. Getting closer to Finland, meaning the product is almost finished. So
Interesting.
yeah,
I like that.
continue, man.
When Solomon had concluded to undertake so magnificent a work as the building of the temple, he found it necessary to apply for assistance to the Phoenicians, who were the most commercial people and the greatest navigators in the world. To the brethren, of course, it will at once occur that Phoenicia was the name by which our order was known. At the time they founded Tyre. Remember, Tyre is like rock. It basically means lodestone.
Yes.
And Sidon under Ho, the son of Chus. Okay, these are really interesting names here. And the correlations relate back to Z and the Olmec and some of the foundations of the Aztec Mayan culture. At the time of Solomon's application, Hiram, king of Tyre, was grand signior of the Phoenicia. So remember, now they're describing Phoenicia not as a country, but as the title or the name that the order was known by. This is the Oriental Order, became the Oriental Order of the Masons. And as I described it when we first started, this was like a secret society that controlled the land and the sea, the secrets of the compass and stuff like that. We'll get into that a little bit more. Hiram, Grand Signior of Phoenicia, upon his recommendation and endorsement, Solomon was admitted into the mysteries of the order, and it was here that he first became acquainted with the science of navigation and the use of the mariner's compass. The excellent purpose to which he put his new acquisition has already been alluded to. When the Jews were carried captive to Assyria by Solomon Wazov, the archives of their branch of the order were sent to Phoenicia. And in the course of a few generations, the knowledge of the magnet was lost to the Jews, oral tradition failing to preserve the secret. It does not appear that Solomon ever acquainted the Phoenicians with the location of Ophir, the natural cupidity of his race, overcoming in this instance the moral obligations under which he rested as a brother. From this period, the knowledge of the magnet was guarded in the most stringent manner by the Phoenician. None but the most eminent persons, such as had proved their worthiness by a long course of study, service, and the highest attainments, were admitted to the degree of the needle's eye. Now, the needle's eye was also the nickname for the letter Q, or Kaf, as we were mentioning earlier. And those who possessed the qualifications necessary to take the degree, being always rather philosophical thinkers than men of action, many centuries elapsed before a man arose. Let's scooch over here. who was the same time capable of taking the degree which would give him the necessary information and equal to the task of organizing and conducting a voyage of discovery, such as those of the brothers Christopher and the Cabots. So Christopher Columbus, and this has been hypothesized by many other writers over the years, that he was part of a secret society, that, Freemasonry, so on and so forth, and that he was kind of reintroducing his people to the lands of Ophir, which is not a crazy jump, because when you look at the people that remember, what was his navigator? He had an Irish redheaded navigator. He had
Right.
Hebrew translators. He had Arabic translators.
Hmm.
I mean, he knew exactly what he was expecting, right?
Yeah, Columbus had an Irish navigator, and he had a quote unquote North African navigator as well. I forget the guy's name. They were calling him like Dark something or Black something, Dark John or Dark Juan, Black Juan, something like that. But he had two trick up the sleeve navigators from unusual origin countries. Yeah.
Yeah, who were part of this brotherhood is what I'm trying to correlate.
Mhm.
And we're very much well aware of what the Yucatan was, what the Gulf of Mexico was, and we'll crisscross some more articles further on that kind of strengthen and correlate into that whole thing. The process of the world was retarded many ages by the admission into the mysteries of that class of philosophers who looked with contempt upon all the practical affairs of life. So they got too philosophical, and they didn't have enough men of action who could use this sacred knowledge and put it into work, essentially, which is kind of a funny take, since this is being written in America during the gold rush, essentially. It is only just to brother Flario Gioa, having deprived him of the fame of originally discovering the properties of the magnet, that I should candidly state that the very high grounds upon which his claims for the gratitude are based. I'm going to jump ahead. I wanted to talk about.
You touched on Tyre real quick while you find it. Tyre or Tyre, this Phoenician, capital, or at least a strong point,
Yeah.
is uncoincidentally, the Norse and Germanic rune and god Tyr, or Tiwaz, the Tiwaz rune, the Tivaz. So Tyr, that's the T, that's like the Sagittarius T, the Tau symbol,
No. Yeah.
the
The Tau
Thor's
reference is
hammer,
great.
the Thor's hammer. Oh, right, this is your TOs and your techs showing up in South America as well, Central America. Teo, this is Theo. But that T, that symbol, the Tyr, which is Mars in that case, because Mars, god of war, that's where you get your blood red and your purple, which is the Tyrian dye, meaning blood colored, Tyrian. So, yeah, Tyre is Tyr, the Norse rune. Go look that up. The T.
Well, the rest is kind of like, once I start, I gotta finish it. And it's just, but yeah. So basically, essentially, the big part I wanted to walk away from was Solomon was initiated into a secret order. The secret order were the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were the title kind of given to the highest ranking, what we would call Freemasons of today. This Oriental order. And again, if you want a book and you want to dive into this further, I believe it's called Oriental Masonry. It is available on archive. You type that in, it should pop up. Fantastic read. You can take a lot of these little tidbits in this article here and extrapolate on them into quite a lot more detail. But yeah, and that establishing the lands of Ophir here in America, kind of something that I've been showing quite endlessly, and it correlates nicely to the Yucatan, because
Yes.
what were the Spaniards looking for? Why did they journey so far north into America? So on and so forth. And they themselves, as well as Columbus, I mean, Columbus stated this to begin with, but they knew these lands to be Ophir. The mining territories in Colorado, Oregon, and California were often called the Ophir lands, and mining claims were often stated as Ophir.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
when the Aztecs and Mayans state where they got all their gold from, it wasn't anywhere in Mexico. For gold is scarce in Mexico, and it doesn't exist on the Yucatan at all. There's no minerals there. It all came from America. You could even go as far as to say Alaska, and I would say so as well. We've
Mhm.
talked about the giant petrified ship found in Alaska. Remember the 1,200 footer,
Mhm.
correlating nicely with Atlantis. We've talked about the Etruscan cities and tombs, the Grecian cities found buried in mountainsides in Alaska. But yeah, so I just wanted to make that reference there and show that the Q and the quintessence of alchemy and the Hebraic Phoenician overlay with the letter is really important, and kind of starts bridging the gap again between philosophy, uh, cosmology, language, and the, as the title of the show was, the Finnish, the ancient sea peoples. And
Mhm.
it started obviously with the Solomon connection. Before I wanted to read this one on the origin of the Etruscans, but I just rambled for a long time, so by all means jump in.
I've got some newspapers in reference to the mining in the Americas, but hey,
Well,
man,
I'm going to do a
continue.
quick little origin of the Etruscan article here from
Go
the
for it.
1800s, just to kind of give an overview of what I have here, and then I wanted to talk about this writer who, after working for 30 years, comes to the conclusion that the Etruscan language is Finnish.
Mm.
After 25 years, sorry. Really great article. The Ancient Etruscan Mystery Solved.
I hope you're listening, Dylan Sacoccio.
And then we're going to bring that over after to the Aztecs were crossbreeds of Indians and Etruscans,
Mhm.
and show not only was Arabic a strong root in Mexico, and the whole silly narrative is that the Spaniards brought Arabic with them, but that's nonsense. It was here. We've shown a lot of correlations in your work, in our conversations with some of the Indians of the Gulf states, their Arabic roots, as well as kind of phonetic and Hebrew, which are
Mhm.
all intertwined. So yeah, I'm just going to do a quick little article here about the origins of the Etruscans. This is from the late 1800s. The origin of the Etruscan race is one of the most disputed problems in the whole compass of classical inquiry. The country of Italy, to which they gave a name, was inhabited before them, men are pretty well agreed. Now, we've talked about Italy, how many correlations there are between Italy and Florida, how many correlations there are between the Gulf of Mexico and the Mediterranean that they share, the Nile and the Mississippi. It's like they're just mere images of one another, right? And that where you find race and language in the Med, you find here, right? The Minoans, the Greeks, the Phoenicians, on and on and on and on. They're just like one and the same. They're mirrors of each other. And Italy is a perfect example of that. Now, Italy, many of the cities in Italy, Pompeii and Herculaneum, these cities were found by accident, and that they were lost to the pages of time. And that when they got in there, they found that Pompeii and Herculaneum were Etruscan, and the art and everything. And when you look at their jewelry, it's amazingly Egyptian, and they find these same correlations. But anyways, that the country of Italy to which they gave the name, was inhabited. Also, that they came originally from another land. Beyond these points, there are wide divergencies of opinion. George Dennis has just published an entirely new edition of his Cities and Cemeteries of Etruria, which is kind of, his book has a lot of images similar to what you were just showing. The inside of all these tombs had these amazing fresco paintings, told quite an amazing story. and they show symbolically and many other relations between the Greeks and the Minoans, and the overlap is endless. You could basically say that the Etruscans are Greeks and the Greeks are Etruscans, and you could say that about the early Italians, although they didn't call themselves Italians. They were Etruscans. For the first edition, yeah. For the second edition, he made 5 additional tours, and the entire work has been revised. Mr. Dennis does not claim that he has solved the difficult problem, but he adheres to the traditions recorded by Herodotus that the Etruscans were a colony of Lydians. Now, the Lydians were also known as Minoans. So, how funny is that? Right. And I'd show that we're going to get into an article here about the Aztecs were crossbreeds of Indians and Etruscans, right? Well, there were crossbreeds of Minoans, right, in Florida, and the Greeks, which you've covered extensively, showing that their roots go, back into long beyond the story of time here in the Gulf of Mexico. And the Etruscans are an important piece of that.
Minoans, Menorcans,
Yep.
Seminoles,
Yep.
Seminoles, right? Menorcan.
Yep. And the Seminole Arabic relation is really important because, again, this was going to bridge the gap between the Yucatan and the Mediterranean as well, strengthening kind of what we've been showing. Apart from this theory, the book has a rare interest for the information it gives to show the extraordinary degree of civilization which that people had attained ages before the straw hut of Romulus arose on the Palatine. I think that meant to say Romulus, but typo. They were undoubtedly one of the most remarkable nations of antiquity, the great civilizers of Italy, and their influence extended over the whole of the ancient world and has affected every subsequent age. Now, we've talked a lot in the past about Genoa, right? And the story of Genoa, its foundation, right? And its relation to Noah. That Genoa was founded and supposedly Noah landed there after fleeing a cataclysm. And me and you have postulated strongly that he was fleeing the Gulf of Mexico or America, and that he found the Mediterranean and landed in Italy or on the peninsula there and founded Genoa. And Genoa is named after Janus. Janus and Noah being similar overlays. And when you look at some older mythologies, Neptune or Poseidon and Janus / Hercules are like one and the same.
Enoch and Enki.
Yes.
Because
exactly.
Noah is Enoch, is Enki, is Poseidon. That's also where you get your other, Phoenician capital was Tyre, and then Sidon, Sidon, Poseidon, right?
Yep.
That's Poseidon.
And Sedona, Arizona, and Venice have a very strong overlay there because we've talked endlessly about Arizona was covered in a population of over 1 billion, it seems, when you look at the canal work there. And again, in my Anomalous America episode on Arizona, we showed that some of the biggest buildings ever made were in Arizona and Colorado. 6-mile long stone buildings, 1,200, 2,000 plus room buildings, canals that are made from the most advanced terracotta ever seen, more advanced than anything ever found in China. They hold together so well still that Phoenix, Arizona is the entire foundation of Phoenix, Arizona is built on the foundation of the previous civilization that lived there. And the canals are thousands and thousands of miles. And that the canal structures of Italy, they, in this time frame, they're saying, oh, they must have copied Italy. But I think there was an event and they took their technology and built the same thing in Italy. And, we talked about Pinal County, Arizona, which is where Florence is, which is a direct correlation again to Pinellas, right? County, Florida.
Yes, Pinellas, which used to be called Pinal.
Yeah. I mean, it again, we've said all this stuff before, so I don't want to beat a dead horse. But anyways, to sum up this article, they go as far as to say is that the Etruscans came from a foreign land after a cataclysm, and they gave and brought astrology, mythology, metallurgy, advanced stone construction, all these things It's like the similar stories we were mentioning with the Finnish and the Yucatan and the Veracocha and all of these other cultures, Quetzalcoatl. There's so many that overlay. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of just do a quick summary of that because people aren't even familiar with the Etruscans. And I think they're, like I mentioned earlier, with the Phoenicians being more of a secret priesthood or class of philosopher, that the Etruscans were kind of more of a fixed people, and that the Phoenicians were Etruscans, but they were that mariner class that was making its way back to America.
It's like being a Druid or being a Toltec. A lot of people think Toltec is a race, but that too, although it might imply an ethnicity or a race, it is, or a tribal association. Toltec was always a status, right?
Yeah.
Just like Aryan, people going back to that interpretation of it being noble one, or hey, mister, my kitty.
Yeah, the Aryan is that's a big one that someday we're gonna have to. We've been putting that one off for a while, but yeah, the overlays there, with Aryan, because it's like almost like saying Phoenician. They're almost interchangeable.
Could I show you a picture?
Please, absolutely. I don't want to read the whole time. People have enough of that. Oh, I love it. I love it. That's gonna be good.
I'm sure you've seen this one.
Yeah, you showed me this one.
Phoenicians first in the New World. Let's see, how can I hide this? Oh, can I get rid of those down at the bottom? Who knows? So, a new analysis and translation of long discredited inscription has led an authority on the ancient Phoenicians to conclude that they landed in Brazil some 2,000 years before Columbus reached the New World. While this further complicates the argument as to who discovered America, Dr. Cyrus H. Gordon of Brandeis University, who has reassessed the inscription, emphasizes that Columbus still probably deserves chief credit for blah, blah, blah. Come on, man. And here I've got this part highlighted. He argued that such visitors brought with them architectural ideas such as pyramid building and monumental stone structures supported by a forest of columns in the Egyptian manner. The traditional view is that the Aztec and Mayan cultures were indigenous. Pottery, recently found in Ecuador, suggests a Japanese visit in about 2500 BC. A Chinese visit to Mexico in 450 AD has been claimed, and various scholars have argued that Irish or Welsh visitors, among others, antedated the Vikings. Gordon notes that the Brazilian inscription refers to a human sacrifice and suggests that this practice may have reached the Americas through such travelers. The ritual is one, he said, in the announcement that the Aztecs, conceivably with the zeal of converts, carried to fantastic extremes. So lots of good stuff in this article, but I'll flip over to another one. I always talk about this. This is the Spanish writing home. Oh, and by the way, Brazil, the name for Brazil, the Irish word for Atlantis, or this mythical landmass to the west, is Hybrasil. Hybrasil.
Yeah, Yggdrasil.
Right, Yggdrasil too, up by the North Pole, but Hybrasil is basically one of your Irish names for this continent west of Eurasia. And I'm going to have to turn up the... Oh, here's a good one. Nobody knows just who discovered America for the first time. Many people have visited the North American continent and possibly South America as well, before Columbus sighted Watling Island in 1492. The first may very well have been Phoenician seamen who came as far as the Azores around 1000 BC. We have to do it right now?
Or the
All right.
ships of Tarshish. Yeah.
Hang on, my cat's getting fed up. Let you talk for a second.
Yeah. I'm gonna share my screen. Can you do that for me? Okay, since you mentioned the Aztecs, I'm just gonna jump into this article here. December 1919. Now, as he was mentioning there before, we've correlated a lot of different people to America and to the Gulf, and yeah, it seems a bit overwhelming, but the Atlantean route is really important. And what seems to be the underlying um, kind of giveaway here is that there was some kind of event, some kind of cataclysm, and maybe more than one. And I tend to lean towards what the Mayans said. The Mayans said that there were four previous ages, all destroyed by a different element. And a lot of the old newspaper articles I've gone through in my series, State by State, have shown that there's not just necessarily one buried civilization, but in some places, several, up to four. There are places in Italy where they've found four different successive constructions. Constantinople, if anyone's seen the underground aqueduct system there, it's insane. It's immense. And when they first discovered it, they didn't even know it was there. And they found two or three different layers underneath that. And I mean, us being, Americans and Longo being in Florida, and, kind of the whole purpose of his channel, his focus has been there. And, but yeah, so the Phoenician connection is really important. But back to the article. Aztecs were crossbred of Indians and Etruscans, declares Professor Porta. Some 6 miles inland from the Gulf of Campeche on the northwest coast of the Yucatan, where Antistilius, the Etruscan admiral, is believed to have landed about 478 years before the birth of Christ, stands the crumbling jungle-grown ruins of a once great city. The ancient name of this ruined city, the first recorded visit to which was made by the Spanish bishop de Landa, who traveled in the train of Hernando Cortez, was Uxmal. 600 archaeologists of note have pondered the mystery of Uxmal, just as they have those of the other ruined communities in the former kingdom of Quiche, those of Tikal, Chichen Itza, Zupa in particular. But one by one they have given up, saying, on this point history is silent. It would seem that none of these savants, and I offer the suggestion with all courtesy and with great deference to their erudition, has given sufficient time to a consideration of ancient Etruria. Otherwise, they would have learned and quickly applied to their reflections on prehistoric America that Uxmal was the name of a prominent Etruscan city which was flourishing in Europe in the 5th century before Christ. The theory that the Aztecs, that marvelous race of people who flourished in Mexico at the time of the conquest, were a crossbreed between Aboriginal Indians and an Aryan race, has been upheld, or at least unchallenged, by the majority of historians and students of early American life. Bancroft, perhaps the most eminent of American historians, asserts that voyages between Europe and America were not uncommon during the early days of the Christian era, and this is supported by positive proofs, which will be discussed in my concluding article. But proofs of a such earlier influx of Europeans, of the Etruscans and the Carthaginians heretofore mentioned, exist in great plenitude throughout Mexico and Central America today. Consider the present-day Indian types whose photographs are reproduced herewith. The man is of a typical Latin build, vastly different from the North American Indian, who was tall, straight, and long of arm and leg. The features, moreover, as in the case of the women, are decidedly Aryan, as against the almost Mongoloid caste of the more northerly tribes. Look carefully at the costume of the women. The designs are typically Etruscan. The embroidery, the stripes in the skirt, even the coifer in her hands is a water jar of pure Etruscan model. These two photographs alone would prove my contentions if there were no other evidence, but there is. During some excavations which was directing in Quetzaltenango, Guatemala, some years ago, my workmen uncovered a large quantity of Etruscan model pottery, other specimens of which have been found in many other parts of Central America. Most of the Central American pottery of today is patterned after designs which originated in Etruria 500 years before Christ. John Fiske, in his discovery of America, dwells on at some length upon the form of government which was used by the Aztecs, Toltecs, and Pelasgi. Now, the Pelasgi is really interesting. They pop up a lot in North America as well. As reported by chronologers who accompanied Cortez, Pizarro, Alvarado, and others on their expeditions to the New World. This system of a division of each city into 4 frailties or districts, each having its own chieftain, and was almost identical with the system employed in Italy during the early days of the Roman Republic. Now remember, the Romans got all of their government from the Etruscans. And again, if you want more information, my Etruscan Origins of Rome video covers this pretty well. The Etruscans, in addition to giving Rome her knowledge of the arts and sciences, also gave her a pattern from which she fashioned her laws. Okay. So much for that. Then there is the matter of the Mexican national symbol, the eagle overcoming the serpent, which Cortez found in the front piece of Montezuma's palace, and which is almost an exact replica of the symbol of Agragas or Agrigentum, an Etruscan settlement in Sicily. The architecture of the deserted cities now crumbling to pieces in the jungles, Etruscan. The design of the age-old fountains, wells, etc., scattered throughout Central America, Etruscan. Jewelry and other adornments into which designs are worked, all Etruscan. Do not these evidences, backed by the writings of Pliny, Plutarch, and others, have the crumbling maps and parchments preserved in the convent of the Monte Cassino, to say nothing of the archaeological treasures possessed by Marciano Rossi in the library of Santa Clara University, make out a case for the Etruscan discovery of America 2,000 years before Columbus, just like your article was saying. In my concluding article of this series, I shall discuss briefly, perforce, the scarcely less remarkable visit of Plinius to the Gulf of Mexico in AD 68, while commander-in-chief of the Roman Navy under the Emperor Vespasian, and the subsequent ostracism of his friend Julius Sabino to Tulia Major, America, for 7 years. Also the evidences of those visits which remain to this day. So, yeah, thanks for sticking with me through that long read.
No worries, man. That's killer stuff.
Yeah, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And Etruscan in America is unique. You know, you'll almost always see Phoenician in America. I just wanted to shit, what was I going to say? Okay, well, here, let's just go with that. You know, Phoenician, Etruscan, Etrus. Sorry, my cat's making noise. Hey.
Dylan's just killing it here. Yeah, I love the holy stork sailor reference. That's key. And the storks were always a symbol of the Northlands. The stork and the crane was also a symbolic animal in the Egyptian mythos. And the crane is, you know, it exists in many Native American cultures as well as in the Gulf. That's what they were called. I got something in the way, because they had the use of letters, means they're priests, Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there's a stone in America. I'm spacing the name of it. Man. Anyways, it was covered in um, um, letters that they couldn't. It took like 50 years for them to finally find somebody who could translate it, and they basically said it was Pulaski, and they translated it as to say that people from Atlantis were traveling to China to make a trade deal or something along those lines.
Mhm. So I just
What do
want
we
to
have?
show here.
Yeah, what's this?
This is some Finnish language showing up in Inca language, I believe. Quechuan, I believe, is Quechuan. Quechua. Um, yeah, it's Quechua. So parts of Peru, parts of Bolivia. This is Inca, one of the Inca languages. And here we go. On the left, you have Quechuan. On the right, you have Suomi. Okay? Suomi is Finnish. It's what they call themselves. Suomi means swampy. So you have Suomi, that's where you get Sumeria too. So Finnish, Phoenician, Author, Assyrian. Sumeria from Suomi. And the list goes on. Hellenic, Helvetic. The Phoenician deity El is the Finnish deity, or the Finnish concept of hell, this heavenly spirit at the North Pole, this protected place. And these are the two words that the church demonized the most: hell and ass. Hell and Oz. Asgard, Osgard, and then hell, as in Helsinki. When hell froze over, God forbid, when hell froze over, well, that happened. And here's just some evidence that Finnish has no business showing up, in South America. The only reason that would happen is if they were, in fact, the true Phoenicians, or responsible for what we know as the Phoenicians and their maritime travel. So, on the left, like I said, you have the Inca language. I believe it's Quechuan. So I believe that's Inca, but it's a Central or South American language. Then on the right, you have Finnish. So forge, Takoa, compared to Takai, right? Model, Mali, compared to Mali. So that's spot on. Realize, Tajuta, Takai. Narrow, Kapi, Kapia, Kapi. Flee, Kerpu versus Kilpi. Shelter, Katos versus Katos. That's spot on again. Root or just, Jury versus Jura. Singota, catapult. In Finnish, Sinkui. Jam, Hilo versus Hinku. Not as close, but you can see it. Parkua, meaning cry, is Parkui. Sutuisa, meaning crazy, is Sutuisa. Now that's a tough one to have link up like that. Kiria, meaning spurt, is Kirij. And Tinkia, meaning bargain, is Tinkuchi. And I think there's more if I scroll down a little.
Yeah, it's great because you'll see you can even do this with Japanese and the older Chinese translations, same thing. And yeah, it's crazy. It
So,
even
yeah, man.
reminds me of some of the South Pacific language. There's a lot of overlay there. They tell us a very similar story of a seafaring people that came from the West or from the East.
Wyatt, thank you for the $9.99. Appreciate that. Thanks, man. Feel free to comment when you tip if you want me to read it out loud. Whatever. But so basically, that's a Finnish connection showing up in South America. Let's see what else I got in this file. Phoenicians, right, often being depicted with blue eyes. This is the alphabet system according to the Bach saga. And J.R.R. Tolkien, when he was constructing his Elfin languages, used Finnish, 90% Finnish, and 10% Welsh, right? Because Finnish is the most phonetic language on the earth. And Welsh is the wellspring of all pictographical, or what's the word? Inside of hieroglyphic languages, hieroglyphic and pictographical languages, alphabets. But the alphabet going from alpha, beta, okay, or the alphabet, goes back to Finland in phonetic language. So this is the origin of your runes and your poons, your puns, everything I'm doing, all this wordplay is essentially puns, making puns and things like that.
Yeah, the puns and all this, it correlates a lot with poetry, and poetry is incredibly strong with the Finnish as well as the Etruscan.
Mm-hmm. Here we have the Finnish structure of the caste system, pre-cataclysm, before the fall of man. You had 12 sons, 7 daughters in almost every family, especially in the nobility, you could call them. And this is how the pyramid system functioned originally. Because the pyramid goes back to Phoenician and pirate, meaning pirouette. Pirouette is what the Finnish highest family on the planet called themselves at one time. And let's see. Phoenician alphabet, no coincidence, they're all runes. In fact, a lot of them look like Ogham script, right? That X looks like Ogham.
Yep. And there's a lot of distinctly Chinese too. Older Chinese script looks very much like this before they became more complex and they started tying multiple letters together.
Mm-hmm.
And if you'll go back really quick, you could see what I was mentioning with the Q. And people,
Eye of the needle.
yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And you can see the compass.
Yes.
And yeah,
for sure, man.
The 2 divisions and the hemispheres of the brain.
Right. Yeah, that's a big one too. With the brain stem coming down at the back.
Yep.
Here are some Phoenician figurines. Okay. Notice the slender physique and the tall, pointy hat. Okay. And I already went through that.
And the kind of Phrygian correlation there is important because this goes back to the Lydians. The Lydians and the Phrygian hats, and the Minoans, right? You see that hat everywhere. The pointy dunce cap. Why did it become the dunce? Why did it become the hat of the dunce? It wasn't originally. Yeah, this is a good one. I like this one too. This does a great job of showing the blending.
Punic, so that's Carthaginian Phoenician language alphabet. Runic, which is high up, Germanic, Norse. Same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They'll tell you that Finnish. Why does Finnish stand out? Why is it so unique? But by the way, this isn't wrong because Maya goes back to Maria or Venus or the goddess being represented in the sign of Taurus. Okay, Taurus. Then down in Finnish you have Taukoku. Now I don't speak Finnish, so forgive me, but that's not wrong. It's just taking a different approach to the month. And this is an article explaining a Phoenician lamp being found off the coast of Sweden and Finland. Phoenician lamp. So people say, where are the artifacts? They're there, especially when you understand. We were looking at this with Dylan Sicoccio. Someone actually told me this is Balk. I thought that it was Baltic, but it's Balkan, right? Of course. So this is like a Turkic language root, but still, this is just pushing the Sumerian origins farther north and farther north. And Hungarian, right? So controversy on the origins and early history of the Hungarians. Okay, now why the Hungarians, who are linguistically closest to the Finnish, the Suomi, why are they getting linked to both the Sumerians and the Finnish if there's not a common thread there between the two? Right, so they're debating, oh, did Hungarian come from Finnish or did it come from Sumerian? Well, it's probably an offshoot of both. They're one and the same. And Hungary, by the way, in that assembly line that I was describing about, that assembly line, Hungary was lunchtime, was the lunch break. The Sumerian question, okay? After British, French, and German archaeologists and linguists discovered and deciphered the oldest known written records in Mesopotamia and its neighboring regions during the first half of the 19th century, they came to the conclusion that the language of those ancient inscriptions was neither Indo-European nor Semitic, but an agglutinative language which just demonstrated significant similarities with the group of agglutinative languages known at the time as the Turanian ethno-linguistic group, which included Hungarian, Turkic, Mongolian, and Finnic. And then this Ural Altaic group is where you get the link between Finnic and Hungarian, Ural language family today. And yeah, there's more to that. Sumerian, Suomi. That's what the Finnish actually call themselves, Suomi. And it means swampy. So where do these people go? Sumeria, believe it or not, has a lot of bogs and swamps. And Florida has a ton of bogs and swamps, swampland, right?
Yep.
And the swamps absorb this radiation.
Yeah, it's like we talked about that. We've mentioned this many times before. The swamps are overlooked. And in my last Anomalous America video, I talked about the bayous of Mississippi. And this correlates nicely with what we've said a million times about the bayou of Florida, or the swamps or Everglades, that they're completely man-made, or at least shaped. Perhaps their foundations are not, but they are shaped. And the ages of time have masked this highly. This gentleman spent 40 years mapping all of the bayous of Mississippi and showed that it was a giant grid. And I would imagine that the Everglades, he also said that not only does it protect from hurricanes, it absorbs and provides insane ecological roots, but also protects from the flooding of the Mississippi. And yeah, Florida is from stem to stern been shaped. And we talked about it being a natural harbor, breakwater, right? And that the Everglades and all of these things have been designed to soften the blow from storms, as well as other things, floods, perhaps.
Yeah, the 150-foot tall cypress trees would stop the hurricanes dead in their tracks.
Yep.
And yeah, man.
And what that did, they even talked about this in the, I believe it was the 30s, may have been later, that the actual devastation of the cypress forests were having huge weather pattern changes for the peninsula of Florida, as well as the Gulf of Mexico inside of the peninsula.
Old world Micmac. Magar equals Magog, right? The Magi. Okay. So, and look what we're looking at right now. You've got Sumerian being the Assyriology, okay? Assur and Suomi, Assyrian, Sumerian. But then also, like he's saying, the Magyar, I don't know how to say it, Magyar, is a Hungarian, this unique Hungarian ethnic group. And that Magi root, of course, is very telling.
Yep. Well, yeah, we've mentioned the Rus, the Empire of Rus. King Rurik comes from this Empire of Rus, this lineage of Rus. And this also is funny because Mag and Magi, they went by MAGA. And isn't it funny that Trump is a descendant of King Rurik, one of the leaders of Rus, one of the lineage of Rus, as well as Blavatsky.
Mhm.
Blavatsky and Trump are related, but
Ooh, nice.
they also have that same lineage, and that Trump, and "Make America Great Again" was not a
Mhm.
slogan picked on accident.
Yes,
It relates to
the Magus.
Ahura Mazda and the Keepers of the Flame. This goes
Mhm.
to the same Oriental orders of the people keeping, the magnetism brotherhood.
That's killer, man. That's crazy. The Magus, MAGA, make Atlantis great again, guys. Okay. Raven's Beak, Zoom gas money. I don't know what that means. Stay up, archivist. I'm gonna interpret this as he's paying. Did this go to you?
No, it's to you.
I'm
Yeah,
assuming.
and it's no coincidence again that we're talking about Florida. And Trump has said all sorts of crazy things about Florida.
Mhm. I'm gonna interpret this as he's paying us to keep streaming for longer.
Yeah, I
I
don't know
think
what that means either.
because I think he thinks we're
Gas
gonna
money,
cut
for
off
you,
that.
I guess, to keep us going.
Right.
Either way, cool. Thanks for the donation.
Thank you, man. Raven's Beak, appreciate it. And I'll just flip through some more of these. Lots of text. Go read these. I'm sure you could back search some of this text. And if you just search Sumerian, Suomi, Finnish, Phoenician, if it's not blocked too hard. I want to read all this, but here we go. There is a chart. There we go. Okay. On the left is Sumerian. Far left is Sumerian. On the second from left is modern Finnish. Third from left is the Finnish equivalent of what that sound is if it's not matching up. Okay. In most cases, it does. The third or the middle or second from right column is ancient or modern Hebrew. And the farthest right is the Finnish equivalent of the Hebrew pronunciation, I believe. So let's, right off the top, Sumerian, Abba is in Finnish, Api, Abba, or Apaja. And, I don't want to read them all down. I'm going to butcher all the pronunciations, but Al compared to Allah, La, Alas, Ama to Ama, Ar to Aro, Badar, Patar to Pata. And these are the connections you find between Finnish, Suomi, and Sumerian. So, that this connection is not unfounded, right?
No. Yeah, it makes me think of Sumerians of America.
Mm-hmm.
We've made a lot of the overlays between Canada and Canaan, and Canada and Canaan being the the land closer to the pole, and a lot of the Viking um, establishments and cities that existed in northern Canada, and that below Canaan you had Katai, was another name for Central America, or central part of the Mississippi Valley. And the Sumerians are a big part of that. And it's spelled Cinn, but it's obviously Sumerian. And the language overlaps directly to Etruscan. And as we mentioned to start when we were talking about the Micmac, the pictograph overlaps are crazy.
Here, I've got a good one for you. Did you send me this?
Yep. Yeah.
With the purple
I remember this one.
highlighter. Okay. Love this one. The Jews, the Phoenicians, the Chaldees are all stated to have visited our islands at various periods and perhaps to have colonized them. It is the delight of one school of Gaelic writers to discover many affinities between the Hebrew and Gaelic tongues, and assuredly, to a mere layman, these resemblances seem distinct and unmistakable. The Irish name for the golden gorget of the Druids, the Yodkin, I don't know what that's saying, Fodhin Moraine, is identical with the Chaldee name for Urim and Thummim, or Urim and Thummim. In short, continues Governor Pownell, early Irish antiquities, Archaeologia, volume, was that 7? Volume
This is
7.
from the book of the Chaldees. And if you haven't read it, guys, you got to read it. It's amazing, chock full.
Yeah. Ur is Ireland, if I'm not mistaken. Ur is almost always referring to Ireland, the land of Ur, and Tyre. Tyre is the iron. Tyre, the people of Tyrian die. That's iron. That's your iron land, right?
Yeah, and it relates, as we mentioned, to Arizona, and that the original people there called themselves the Arizona. And
Iroquois, Iroquois.
Yep, the some of the ancient tombs found in Arizona were very much reminiscent of Roman or Etruscan tombs.
Right. If you're in, Jamaican and Irish connection there, if you're feeling Irieman, Erie, feeling eerie, Irie, like Erie, right?
Yep.
And here we go. My friend the rabbi will have it that none but Jews or Chaldees could have brought the name and the thing to Ireland. When Martin visited the island of St. Kilda last century, he made the statement that, quote, the ancient Hebrew measure of omer and cubit continues to be used in this isle, and whatever the fact may be worth, the emblem known as Solomon's seal has been found by Scottish antiquaries upon many a sculpted stone. There seems little doubt that the Phoenicians, at any rate, were here. They indeed appear to have been as great navigators as the British ever were. They are said to have crossed the Atlantic and planted a settlement in Florida. They are believed to have sailed far into the eastern seas and to various parts of Africa, and they are admitted to have visited all the western coasts of Europe, and in the time of Hiram, king of Tyre, bidding of Solomon the Great. They are supposed to have traded at this time with the metalworkers of Cornwall and to have colonized some parts of Ireland. And presumably, it was during this period that the seal of Solomon was carved upon the Scottish stones. Some of this is conjecture, some fact, but it is interesting to think of our islands as blank.
Yeah, it goes on to say that it's interesting to consider some of our islands as kind of ports between the Phoenicians and the Med and the Yucatan. And it's interesting they mentioned the metalworkers of Cornwall, and we talked about again, metallurgy and the Phoenicians carrying metallurgy as well as astronomy, like the Etruscans all over. And of course, Ireland and Great Britain would play a leading role, because when you look at, again, from a cosmology standpoint, the sages of the Etruscans, the Brahmins, the Druids, they have almost identical beliefs of the sky, the earth, kind of metaphysics. It's all the same. So when we talk
Right.
about this priest class, when we mentioned again the eye of the needle and the philosophers, the Q and magnetism, magi, right? These are the Druids. These are the Brahmins. It's the same thing, just labeled something by a different group of people on a whole different part of the world.
Right. We've actually got the end of this here. But it is interesting to think of our islands as the hot country washed by the Orinoco.
Orinoco,
Humboldt,
yeah.
Orinoco. Humboldt found tribes of a dark and others of a light hue. Oh, wait. Yes, I think this is the continuation. Living almost in juxtaposition. And the Shawnees or Shawanosi, who formerly inhabited West Florida, of which country they did not believe their ancestors to be the Aborigines, have or used to have a belief that Florida had once been inhabited by white people who had the use of iron tools, as in iron land. Blackhoof affirms that this was in 1819, 65 years after he and his tribe had left Florida. That he has often heard it spoken of by old people, that stumps of trees covered with earth were frequently found, which had been cut down by edged tools. E. Calloway, Florida's 1936 Republican candidate for governor, found sawed clean, petrified logs of gopher wood. That is what set him off on his real, trail, looking into the biblical history of Florida. So yes, edged tools, absolutely.
This correlates with the bog people. Remember, we've
Yes.
mentioned, and Longo's done a great job of covering this, that the what was the tribe? The Seminoles and the Muscovite.
Muskogee.
They had a almost identical burial method as the bog people, and the bog people were fair skinned, redheaded, using iron tools. They were found buried. Several of the graves have been found with iron tools, and this stretches the shoreline farther out before perhaps the Chicxulub event or some kind of flood, right? That moved your stone anchors farther inland, and who knows what happened to the ships they were attached to.
Yes, agreed. Bad Fish Bear, thank you for the $5. Researching endless planted history keeps you from realizing you live in a machine loosh farm. Machine loosh farm. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that was a compliment. I'm not sure.
It doesn't matter. It's all a compliment.
But anyways, yeah, I think that's that book is full. Oh, here we go. Perfect. You can give more information. Oh, and it's related to Finland. Amazing.
So this is a typical bog lake in Finland with your bog bodies coming out of Florida. Okay. This is not just, how do we know that these are 8,000 years old? Because they found one a couple hundred yards out in the ocean, meaning that the sea level had to have dropped a substantial amount. And that used to be a lake out in the ocean. Now it's under the ocean. So we also have the Windover bog bodies, among the greatest archaeological discoveries ever unearthed in the United States. Right? It was only after the bones were declared very old and not the product of a mass murder that the 167 bodies found in a pond in Windover, Florida, began to stir up excitement in the archaeological world. Researchers, I'm going to mute you for a sec because you got flute music coming through. Cool, thank you. Began to stir up excitement in the archaeological world. Researchers from Florida State University came to the site, thinking some more Native American bones had been unearthed in the swamplands. They were guessing the bones were 500 to 600 years old, but when the bones were radiocarbon dated, it turns out the corpses ranged from 6,990 years to 8,120 years. It was then that the academic community became incredibly excited. The Windover Bog has proven to be one of the most important archaeological finds in the United States. And, they found, I can't play the video because it's heavily copyright protected. Yeah, but it's the geneticist explaining how this was clearly, obviously European DNA getting discovered in these old bogs. And people say, oh, radiocarbon dating's garbage, and you might be right. But we can substantiate this by the other site of the exact same type found out in the ocean.
Yeah, sea level change too.
The sea level shows the exact same time frame. And they tried to cover this one up, but they didn't do a good job. So here's a commenter on a blog or something. I don't remember where I found it, but you can back search it if you're concerned with the validity. From talking with local archaeologists and Lund professors, I distinctly remember them showing me photos and sketches of some ancient Neolithic burials in a large bog on Ven, Stormisen. The burials were exactly like the ones above. The archaeologists were intrigued because this type of burial was a commonplace in southern Finland and Karelia, extreme northwest Russia, about 6,000 to 8,000 years ago. My cat. Nordic and Russian archaeologists believed that they were the ancestors of the Sami. Judging from the films on YouTube about the Windover Pond site, Florida archaeologists don't seem to know that the burials are identical to those. Florida archaeologists don't seem to know that burials identical to those in Florida can be found in southern Sweden, southern Finland, and Karelia. But given the results of the most recent DNA studies of Windover mummified bodies, this is highly significant. And what he's referring to is the fact that they were Northern European DNA.
Yeah. Yeah, and they found the same type of burial in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
The lake dwellers there that we've talked about, and how they showed that the pillar driver lake dwelling people of the Tampa area were almost identical in every way to the Swiss people. And this relates exactly to the Finns and what that article said stated as well. I mean, it's just like Venezuela, right? We talked about, Venice, and an article I shared with you a long time ago talked about how the oarsmen were the lake dwellers. The oarsmen preferred to live on piles driven into the ground on the water.
Mm-hmm.
And this relates again to Gotland and Admiralty law foundations. Laws of people who never set foot on land were different than the laws for the people who stayed on ships. Comes from the same group of people. Which is why masonry, right? We talked about the square and the compass was actually a designator for the mariner and the landlubber.
Mm-hmm. Badfish Bear, thank you for the $10. It's not an insult. I'm just letting you know I've died 4 times and I've seen the machine, boys. We are cattle. The Mandela effect is proof of a DL ability. Have me on sometime, LOL. I'll break everyone paradigm. Well, thank you for that, man. Appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad it wasn't an insult. I thought he was saying that our research is a waste because it's all a big illusion, the machine. It's kind of what he was saying there too, but I respect your perspective. I too had a near-death experience and saw beyond the body and have a different opinion of my existence here than I did before. But no matter what, you got to stay positive and be the best person you can. Should I jump into this ancient Etruscan mystery solved, the linguist breakdown, before we're getting kind of, I'm probably got about 10 minutes left here, so I definitely want to work this in.
For sure. What you got up already? Right here?
Yep.
Show you.
Richmond Times, 1915. I'm just going to kind of zoom in on some of these, some of the little pictures here. Fresco from a tomb of ancient Etruscans showing hunting in their Asiatic faces. Here's part of a parchment, portions of the Etruscan book found at Agram and now read for the first time by Professor Jules Martha. A painting, Etruscans taking an oath over a cup of human blood to drive out the Latin rulers of Rome. Now, the Latins and the Etruscans, and who became what we call Romans today, very interesting. Someday we'll have to get into that history and who these people were and why the Vatican and Rome is such a seat of power today. How shoes were made by the ancient Etruscans. Dark skin, white beards. Again, this is just a photocopy, so don't put too much weight on it. Mysterious vase painting of Etruscan history that may be explained. This is, you find, again, we've talked about the toga and how the toga is found on all continents, and that the Asiatic races had a kind of morphine of the toga, and you can still see some of that today. And you can kind of see some of that remnants there with the jaguar leopard skin that the priests wore. After 25 years of labor, a French professor reads the only known book in the Etruscan language that Rome planned to wipe out forever. The great mystery of history, the mystery of the ancient Etruscan language, has been solved at last. Professor Jules Martha, a French scholar, had discovered after 20 years of patient labor that the Etruscans belonged to the Finnish race, originating near the Ural River in Russia, now coming from the north. And he has read their only book from beginning to end. Much has been known about the history of the Etruscans, but their language and origin have hitherto been unanswerable puzzle to the scholars. They were a powerful people occupying the center of Italy when Rome was in its infancy. They were of much higher civilization than the Romans or Latins. The earliest kings of Rome, including the Tarquins, were Etruscans. The earliest legends of Rome deal with the struggles of the Romans against the Etruscans. The fair Lucretia was a victim of a Tarquin who belonged to the Etruscan race. Hence the terrible enmity between the Romans and the Etruscans. When Rome overthrew the kings of the Tarquin family about 475 BC and established a republic, it meant the downfall of the Etruscans. The Romans went to work deliberately to wipe out the memory of the Etruscan race. Every scrap of writing that could be found in the Etruscan language was destroyed, and it was forbidden to speak it under penalty of death. Now, this is very reminiscent of Cortez and many others, the Bolsheviks. Again, I was mentioning earlier in our stream, we talked about with war comes the destruction of ancient culture and language. Some 200 monuments with incomplete Etruscan inscriptions exist, but they do not form a practical basis for reading the language. Large quantities of curious Etruscan pottery and other works of art had also been preserved. Then, by a curious accident, a book in the Etruscan language was found. 20 years ago, an Austrian traveler bought an Egyptian mummy and gave it to the Museum of Agram. The linen band wound round the mummy proved to be an Etruscan book. Now, this is interesting because many of the mummies of the Americas were wound in one continuous piece of fiber. So, very similar. Professor Martha went to work upon this, and by an extraordinary system of comparing the roots of all languages with the Etruscan word, succeeded in deciphering its meaning. He not only read the book, but revealed the meaning of all the inscription on Etruscan tombs in Italy. He had conquered Rome, and after 2,500 years had rescued the Etruscans from the darkness in which the Romans buried them. The words are written in Greek characters, but from right to left. Correlates with what we were mentioning earlier about the Minoans and the Lyrians and the Greeks and the Phoenicians and how many overlaps there are between them. The words are written in Greek. Okay, the book is a manual of navigation containing all the prayers to be offered to the gods to ensure a fair voyage. Apparently, the book had belonged to Etruscan sailors who have been wrecked in Egypt, sold their book to pay their passage back. Then it had been used in embalming a mummy. The Etruscans migrated from the east in prehistoric times to Italy. In the course of their development, they underwent many influences, including that of Greece and Egypt. Their statues show them to have been an Asiatic type, with almond-shaped eyes and prominent cheekbones. Many of their vases are limited from the Greek, but other objects have a character of their own. This is what I was mentioning when I talked about Etruscan tombs in Alaska, found right next to Grecian pottery. One among many interesting facts established by Professor Martha is that the Etruscans first introduced the Roman system of numbers into Europe. This is like we were saying with language and numbers, right? The Phoenicians. The Etruscans do not designate the numerals by letters of the alphabet, as do others of the ancient Semitic races. Evidence too complicated to explain fully here indicates that the Etruscans really introduced the numerals we call Roman, so Roman numerals were Etruscan. These figures are hieroglyphs and were invented long before the alphabetic writing. It reminds me also of Ogham, the vertical strikings.
Mhm.
Another interesting observation made upon the Etruscan artistic remains is that they show a resemblance to Mexican. Remember the article I just read, and other early American work. This may mean that Etruscans were in communication with America through their trade and navigation, for they were evidently great navigators in pre-Roman times. Researches suggest that the Etruscans arrived in Italy from the east on a voyage of discovery about the year 1187 BC. They settled in the region of what is now Florence after a struggle with the Ligurians and the Umbrians. There they found a confederation of 12 great cities, long before Rome grew to importance. In times, there were 3 Etruscan confederations of 12 cities each. Rome, a miserable village before this, became one of the cities in the last confederation formed. 2 kings of the Etruscan family of Tarquin, Servius, Tullus, and Numa ruled over early Rome. The older inhabitants, however, were never satisfied with their rule, and long after a series of ferocious struggles succeeded in overturning them. The sea power of the Etruscans was definitely crushed by the Romans at Cumae in 475 AD. Yeah, really wanted to make sure I got that in there, but basically what you had kind of shown, but with a fun article to go along with it.
Yes. I've probably got to hop off here too.
Okay.
Gotta wrap it up.
Wrap it up.
Unfortunately, that is the best for last. I mean, that's a home run article right there. You gotta send me that because I, with your permission, it's gonna go into my Finnish video coming soon.
Of course. Yeah, whatever you
Finished
need, always.
documentary. And dude, that's great. Finnish, Phoenician, Phoenician, it goes all over the place. Not just Finland, but it's important to know where the name comes from and stuff like that. So thanks for joining me, Ben.
My pleasure. Hopefully everyone enjoyed the content, and it's been a long time since we've been back together, and hopefully we can do it again soon. We could just do hours on this, I'm sure. I only did 3 of the 7 or 8 articles that I had ready to go, but yeah, as always, time is short.
Surely, man. Well, everyone out there, have a good night, and we're signing off. We're finished.
We're finished. Have a wonderful night, guys.